He said, "Jessica, we have to walk." And I knew he was right, but I thought that I was walking to my own execution. And trying to will your body to move and your legs to work. You have all these weird thoughts like, how bad is it going to hurt? Like, what does it actually feel like to die?
So why did your work take you to Somalia, Jessica?
I got a teaching position at an international school in Nairobi, Kenya. And I was teaching 4th grade and I loved it. I was having a great time. And I was out, at a trashy nightclub one night in Nairobi with some of my teacher friends. And I remember standing on the dance floor and looking across the room, and there was this guy, and I motioned him over, and he looked up from his phone and laughed at me and then went back to his phone. And I thought, oh, that's not nice. And so when he looked up again, I waved him over again, and he came over, and I thought his name was Ulrik. He was from Sweden. I'd never met anybody from Sweden before, so that seemed likely to me. And we started dancing, and I realized very quickly that he was not a great dancer. So I said, why don't we go get a drink? And we've been talking for about 20 years now. And his name is actually Eric. And about a year and a half after that night, we got married. And he is the one who was working in Somalia at the time. So I decided to quit my job and move up to Hargeisa with him and start our married life in Somaliland.
At that time, it was around about 2011. What was the landscape like in Somalia politically? And I suppose how dangerous was it for you and your husband working in a humanitarian sense?
Somalia at the time was really divided into 3 parts. So you had Somaliland, it's shaped like a 7. So you had Somaliland up at the top where we were based, relatively peaceful. You had Puntland, which was next level security issue. And then you had southern Somalia, which is what most people are familiar with, which is what we hear about on the news, Mogadishu. You have large al-Shabaab presence, which is, Islamic terrorists. A lot of security threat in that part of the country. The general idea or belief was that, expats weren't the target. We were there to serve, we were there to work, we were there to help. So what you needed to do was just be aware, keep your eyes open, follow security protocols, and the general understanding and belief was that we'd be okay.
And your specific work out there, what were you teaching?
I worked as the regional education advisor for the Danish Demining Group. They are the mine action unit of the Danish Refugee Council. I had been called upon to go down to Somalia to do a staff training, a 3-day staff training. And I had actually canceled it 2 times prior. We'd had it planned, and I just didn't feel good about it. I had this gut feeling that something was off. I went through the necessary security protocols with the security advisor. I checked all the boxes. I did all the things I was required to do. Everybody said it was safe to go down. And so I thought, what are the chances that something bad's going to happen? So I get on a UN plane, I go down there, and it was just Poul. He was the only other expat down there. The larger program manager was, I don't know, he was off on a field visit or something. And the first 2 days of the training, we didn't need to leave the guest house. Everything was taking place on the same compound. And so I wasn't really worried about that. What I was worried about was moving to the south of the city to do a separate training, because I knew from different hostile environmental awareness trainings that I participated in that if something were to happen, I was most vulnerable when I was in transit. And so that's really what I was worried about. And that 3rd morning, I woke up just drenched in sweat, because I knew intuitively something is off, something's not right. But I still got dressed and got in the car and headed to the south of the city, and our trainings went well. Our staff was happy. We had a really great time with them, and I'm thinking, okay, we did it. I was just being paranoid. I'm home free. I'm about ready to get back to the guest house on the north side of the city, and I'm leaving the next morning, and everything was fine. It was going to be great. We start driving through Galkayo through it's more like a village than it is a city. And all of a sudden, a vehicle comes rushing up kind of on the right side of us and cuts us off and splashes mud up all over our windows and our windshield. And I was on my phone at the time because I think I was sending like a last minute email, and, I'm just doing like regular things that you do in the car when you're being driven. And I looked up and I remember saying, "What a jerk who drives like that." And then I hear the crack of the butt of an AK-47 on the car hood, and it sounds like we're being surrounded by very angry men who are screaming in Somali. The security advisor, a Somali guy named Abdurizak, sitting next to me, and his door was pulled open, and there was a very angry man dressed in a police uniform with an AK-47. He pulled Abdurizak out of the car. I remember him just like yanking him out of the seatbelt and slamming him in the head with the butt of his AK. And then he got in next to me and he put the gun to my head and he started screaming at the driver to drive. And all I could think was, this is so bad. This is so bad that I have no frame of reference for it. I don't have anything to reach for, no training I've taken, no book I've read, no movie I've seen. Nothing can prepare me for how bad this is. And then all I kept thinking after that was, even if they let me out, and maybe they're just going to carjack us, right? Maybe they're just going to take my wallet and my passport and my jewelry and kick me out and let me walk back to town. But everything from this moment has changed. My life has changed forever, fundamentally. I don't think anything's ever going to be the same again.
Where did they take you next?
Literally, I don't know how fast we're going, but we're up on two wheels. We're slamming back down. We're up on two wheels. It feels like the car's going to flip. Paul's in the front passenger seat, and he's begging the driver to stop, to slow down, because he's going to kill us. And we're going south, and I know that is a bad thing, because all I know that is south of Galkayo is Mogadishu. And when I think of Mogadishu, I think of Al-Shabaab. And I have no idea who this guy is. We stop. After a while, we change vehicles. We drive. We do this over and over. We stop. More people get in the car. Then we change other vehicles. They separate Paul and I at one point. At another point, it's just completely pitch black, dark, and I hear a high-pitched voice behind me. And I think, my God, this is strange. There's a woman involved, which that would be so odd, especially in Somali culture, because females and males keep very separate. And finally, my curiosity got the best of me, and I turned around, and there was a small child behind me, maybe like 9 years old, and he was wearing belts of ammunition, and he had an AK-47, and it was as big as he was. And I just remember our eyes meeting, and then he does one of these things where he like acknowledges me with his chin, and then motions me to turn back around. And then I would later learn that his name is Abdullahi. He was actually 11, but small for his age, and he'd already killed 3 people, and he was learning the family trade of kidnapping and ransom. I don't know how long it was, but at some point in the middle of the night, they stopped, and the man who was sitting next to me had a turban or like some sort of fabric wrapped around his hair, and he had a machine gun, and it was so long it didn't fit in the vehicle, so he was like hanging out the window of the vehicle. And he yelled at me and told me to get out of the Land Cruiser and start walking. I felt pretty confident that they were going to march me out there and rape me, and then execute me. And I didn't understand why. My brain was moving very slowly, so it was hard to process what was happening, but I have never been more terrified in my life up until this point. And I just kept thinking, like, I don't understand. I don't understand what I did to deserve this. As if, that's how life works. But I guess in those moments, that is what you think. And so he kept screaming at me to walk. And I just kept saying no. And we went back and forth like this a few times. and he was getting very agitated, and Paul came around the back of the vehicle, and I remember him coming over to me and taking my hand, and he said, "Jessica, we have to walk." And I knew he was right, but I thought that I was walking to my own execution, and trying to will your body to move and your legs to work to go to something that you're, and you have all these weird thoughts like, how bad is it going to hurt? Like, what does it actually feel like to die? And I called out to my mom, who had died the year before, and I asked her to help me be strong. It was important to me to have some sort of dignity. I didn't want to beg. I didn't want to lose control. I didn't want to become hysterical. And as we're walking, we're tripping over thorn bushes and rocks, and we're picking ourselves back up. And I remember my leg, I gashed it on something and it started bleeding. And I could feel the blood like settle in between my toes, and it was like sticky and warm. And I remember thinking like, this is good, because what I was experiencing felt so out of body that I wasn't sure, I guess in some ways, if I was still alive, was I really experiencing this? And I remember thinking, okay, like I can feel pain, so I must still be alive. And we walk for a long time, maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then they tell us to stop and get down on our knees. And I think I didn't even get to have any children. Like this is it. This is the end of my life. And then as I'm waiting for what's going to happen next, one of them just says, "Sleep." And I remember I'm on my knees and my head is like hanging down, and I'm like, I don't think I heard that right. And I'm sort of looking around, and they're like, "Sleep." They motion to the ground, like lay down in the dirt and go to sleep. And I just collapsed onto the ground. And the next thing I know, I wake up, and the sun is starting to come up. And really, then I start to understand, like, oh, I'm in hell.
Where had these men taken you? What was the environment that you found yourself?
The first morning that we woke up, we were just out in the middle of the desert. I mean, there was nothing around. There were no villages, no roads. Like, it was just out in the middle of like nowhere. And when I say nowhere, I mean nowhere. And we stayed there for a couple of days, I think. Like, of course you're outside, so you 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of night. But you start to kind of lose track of time in a way. We kept thinking, oh, we'll be taken to a house or taken to a structure, because that's how kidnappings go. Not realizing that they didn't have anywhere to take us, and that we would be kept outside the entire time. And that first day, I remember it was the rainy season, which, doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot in the desert, but there was this torrential downpour for about 20 minutes, and we didn't have anywhere to take cover. So Paul and I wrapped ourselves up in our mat, but we were soaked. And when the rain stopped, we unrolled ourselves from the mat. And I remember looking up into the barrel of a machine gun, and one of them, he had propped up his machine gun right at my head, and I didn't know it because I was under the mat. And I remember like just looking up, and it was right there, and thinking, like, where does he think I'm going to go? Like, what does he think I'm going to do? And the treatment at the beginning, of course, they're establishing their superiority and their control. And so it was quite tough. It was quite mean. I remember learning in a heat training that I had taken, an internal training with my organization, that if you survive the first 48 hours of a hostage taking, then most likely they're not going to kill you. So that was my goal, like just stay alive for the first 48 hours, just stay alive. About a week in, this man named Abdi sort of established himself as the leader of the group. He was interesting because he wore Western clothes. He had like jeans and like a denim jacket on, which was different than what everybody else was wearing. And he spoke pretty good English. And I remember him coming over to us and finally like kind of squatting down in front of us and introducing himself. And we asked very bluntly, "Are you going to kill us? What do you want?" And he said, "No, no, no, no. We're not going to kill you. We just want money." And we were like, "Okay, how much money? We don't have any money. Like, how much money?" And he wouldn't tell us. And it would take a couple more days for us to find out that the ransom demand that they were starting with was $45 million. Because they were operating on this piracy standard of container ships being taken over in the Indian Ocean. And we kept just trying to explain to them, like, we're two humanitarian aid workers. Like, we are not a container ship and a crew. There's no way you're going to get $45 million for us. And that was incredibly scary and frustrating.
And Jessica, for you in those like early days of being, as you now know, a hostage, what were you able to learn about the men that had taken you?
We call them pirates, kidnappers, militia, gangsters. They went by everything. I don't think they knew exactly what they were, but I'll call them pirates. We would have one group of pirates watching us for 5 days, and then they would move in shifts. And so then we would have another group come for 5 days. There were a couple, of course, that I got to know a little bit better than others. Paul and I developed nicknames for them so that we could talk about them and they wouldn't know that we were using their names. The one that we became the closest with, he was a driver, and he made that very clear. He was not a part of these pirates. He was simply there to drive. He took very good care of his vehicle. His name was Dair, but we called him Helper. He was a very religious man. He prayed 5 times a day. He was kind. He was kind to us. And he seemed to have like some sort of influence amongst the group. When there was a lot of conflict going on, I mean, there'd be a lot of inner fighting and conflict amongst the group. You've got these guys who are chewing chat, so they're high, which is this like chat, cat. It has different pronunciations. It's this green leaf that is, my understanding, it's kind of like an amphetamine. And so it makes them all hyped up, and then they'll sit and chew that all night, and then they come down off of it and need another fix, and it just like is this cycle. And he seemed to be able to like modulate the group when things were getting a little bit out of control. They were aggressive. I was very scared of them. I tried to stay out of their way. I tried not to make eye contact, but sometimes I was just like in their crossfire. One of the first things I did was try to portray myself as maternal as opposed to, and I was a little bit older, I think, than a lot of them. I was like 31, 32, a lot of these guys marry like 16, 17-year-olds. So I kept talking about my son. I didn't have a son at the time, but I did that really early on and lied and said I had a baby at home. I wanted them to look at me as a mother. There were moments where I would be trying to sleep and somebody would crawl onto my mat. There were a lot of roving hands. I would pretend to stay asleep and try to push them away. When Helper was there, he would sleep next to me, and I think that he did that to protect me. I think he was very religious, and I don't know for sure, but I choose to believe that one of the reasons I wasn't assaulted was because he was there protecting me, for which I'm very appreciative of. But I also felt like if I had been out there any longer, it was coming. I think they were going to use it as a tactic because negotiations weren't moving fast enough.
Tell me a bit about the way they used psychology against you to kind of keep you guessing.
Abdi was really good about that. He loved to screw with us. He would drive us to the airport in Adado, and we would think, oh my goodness, we're like this is the day the ransom's been paid. They're doing the drop in exchange, and he would stop at the airport, and then he would turn around and look at us, and he would wave his hand and say, wave goodbye, Paul and Jess's. He always called me Jess's. Unless we get the $45 million, you're never going to see these planes. And he would do stuff like that over and over again. Tease us, cruel. The worst was with Abdullahi, the child, where he would order me around and he'd want me to move 2 inches to the left just because he could, and I would refuse to. So then he'd put a knife to my neck. And I'd think, okay, I guess I have to move 2 inches to the left. I have to take the orders of an 11-year-old child.
Yeah, how did you keep yourself from despair? Like, what was your mental process like during those days?
Paul and I made an agreement that we could feel anything, any emotion, but the only one we weren't allowed to feel was despair. I realized that at some point, maybe 40 or 50 days in, that I was really in this for the long haul. And, of course, my first fear was that I was going to die physically. Second fear was that I was going to be assaulted. But the third fear, and the one that really loomed large, was that I was going to lose my mind. And so I thought, well, I think I probably have some things to sort through and to sort out. I'd lost my mom the year before, and we lost her very suddenly. And so there was a lot of grief still to work through, and a lot of dysfunction and some things to figure out there. And so I decided to take every day and spend that day thinking about things that I had gone through and remember things from my life, So my first memory when I was 4 years old and my mom took me to the movie theater for the first time, and I would get so into the memories and the details. I could remember the white flowers on her blue sundress, and I remembered her taking me to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and I remember the shape of her teeth when she laughed, and I would just get so into these memories and to evaluating and wondering and processing and moving through my life. That before I knew it, it was like there wasn't enough time. Somehow I kind of see it as I met myself out there, and this next version of who Jessica was going to be, and that has been that's been a tremendous gift. During the course of captivity, we participated in 6 proof of life calls, which, are exactly as they sound. They'll drive you out into the desert and put you on a satellite phone. There will be somebody on the other end who is a representative. They would call themselves the family communicator. So since there were 2 families involved and an organization, they had 1 point person. Probably about 50 or 60 days into captivity, they drove us out really deep into the desert. They had us wash beforehand, and every time something different would happen, the morning would start differently. You'd think, oh, this is it. This is the day. They had us wash. Maybe they're gonna do the drop and they're gonna exchange us. And so we're sitting there and we're so excited, thinking okay, maybe we're finally getting out of here. And then to our disappointment, we were propped up in front of a camera, it was like a tiny little point and click Kodak camera on this giant tripod. And these 2, they called themselves reporters, but they were 16-year-old kids, to record a proof of life video. They propped up their machine guns behind us, and they gave us orders on what to say, basically identifying ourselves. My name is Jessica Buchanan. As you can see, we're alive. We're safe, we're being treated well. And the 2 messages that we needed to get across was to tell the American military not to attack, and that our families needed to do more because things were not moving in the right direction. That came so far out of left field for us. We weren't anticipating having to do anything like that. And then I'll never forget getting back in the car, and there must have been something going on with one of the weapons. And so they just right next to the car they were shooting rounds of ammunition. And I was I'm falling apart. It was so loud and it was scary, and I didn't know what they were doing. And we just recorded this proof of life video, and I'm thinking this might be the last time my husband ever sees me alive, is splashed all over BBC. And it just felt so dehumanizing. And then it felt also like a reality check, Because I think up until then, we had been thinking like, oh, we're humanitarian aid workers. Like, this thing is going to get resolved quickly. They're going to put pressure, surely our company is putting pressure on these different clans to turn us over and to return us. And then it just felt like, oh, we're in this for the long haul. Like, we need to figure some things out because this thing is not going to be resolved quickly. And I wouldn't say despair, but I would say that was a really low point. A really low point.
And Jessica, have you watched that video back?
I have. I've watched it. My eyes are almost swollen shut from just being in the sun and the unhygienic conditions. And you can tell I'm already starting to lose a lot of weight. And I just think how scared I was and how I just feel really sad for her because she had no idea how much there was left to endure. I contracted a urinary tract infection, and I know these very well. I've dealt with them my whole life, it feels like. And I thought, if this doesn't get treated, I know exactly what's going to happen because it had happened the year before and I had gotten a kidney infection and I had been hospitalized for a week in Nairobi. And I knew that if I got a kidney infection and that went untreated, then things were not looking good for me. I was in a terrible amount of pain, spiking fevers, throwing up, getting to the point where I couldn't really walk. Or stand upright. Of course, I'm laying on the ground under a tree all day and then sleeping out in the open at night. And our last proof of life call was January 16th. I didn't know, of course, that would be our last one. And I said to Alex, the family communicator, here are my symptoms. I'm in a terrible amount of pain. I need a doctor. I need to get to a hospital. I think maybe I've got 2 weeks left. And if you guys don't get me out of here, I'm going to die. And I'm not I'm a direct person, but I'm not a confrontational person. But I was like, and if I die out here, it is going to be on you. It is going to be on you guys because you didn't get us out of here in time. And that was hard for me to say because I don't want to speak that into existence, right? But I also knew my body was starting to shut down. And I woke up January 24th, we put my mat out in the middle of the field where I'm going to sleep, helpers next to me. There are 3 machine guns trained on my head. There were 9 guys on the ground that night, and there was always at least one keeping watch. And this night, everybody was completely passed out. They were stone cold asleep. They're snoring. They're just out. It's really dark this particular night. The stars have completely clouded over. There's no moon. I can't really, it's so dark you can hardly see your hand in front of your face, but I sense that Helper is awake and he's stirred and he's up. And I can tell he's picked up his gun and he's whisper screaming at all the other guys, wake up, wake up, wake up in Somali. And they're sort of moving around. They're trying to wake up. And I'm just kind of peeking out from my blanket because I don't hear anything other than I can hear this scratching noise, something maybe an animal is walking toward us, breaking the grass. And then all of a sudden I hear the night just erupt into gunfire, automatic gunfire, just really fast. And I can see kind of sparks going across me, over me, and Helper gets hit by a bullet and he falls to the ground next to me. And then the rest of them are up, they're firing their guns, and they're getting hit and they're falling to the ground. And all I can think is, oh my God, oh my God. We're getting kidnapped by another group. This is probably Al-Shabaab. And I'm not going to survive this. I don't have the energy. I don't have the strength. I don't have the capacity to survive another group. I'm really going to die out here. All of a sudden, somebody grabs my my shoulders and my ankles and tries to pull the blanket off of me, and I'm trying to keep it up over me. I have my hands in front of me. I'm trying to protect myself, and I hear the sound of a young American man's voice. And he knows my name. And he says, "Jessica, it's okay. You're safe now. We're the American military. We're here to take you home." And I'm able to sit up a little bit, and all of a sudden just shock just overtakes me, and I just start shaking. I can't stop shaking. And I can't make my brain compute what he's just said to me. And all I can say over and over again is, "Wait a second, you're American? Wait, you're American. I don't understand. You're American?" And he says, "We've been watching you for a long time. We know how sick you've been. Yeah, we're going to take you home." And he just explains that he's going to pick me up and throw me over his shoulder and just like carry me to safety, which is what he does. And you know, I have this very distinct memory of my head like bobbing as he's running across the desert with me over his shoulder, thinking, I'm a school teacher from Ohio. Like, how is this my life? And then he puts me on the edge of camp, and there's a little bit of light. I can start seeing that there are lots of soldiers around. My first question is, where's Paul? Did he make it out? Is he safe? Is he okay? And he's sitting there to my left, and he has his shoes on, and he leans over to me and he says, "Jessica, do you know who these guys are?" And I say, "No, I don't know who it's American military, but I don't." He says, "Jessica, this is SEAL Team 6. These are the guys that got Osama bin Laden."
And what did you learn about the extent of this military operation in the days after you were rescued from the desert?
There were thousands of people involved. I mean, from the moment they learned that there was an American being held hostage, the FBI was involved, because anytime there's a crime committed against an American citizen, they take the lead. President Obama was being briefed every day about my well-being and my whereabouts and the state of the situation. And there are a couple of things that need to happen in a hostage situation in order for a military rescue to be considered. One of them is if there's an imminent loss of life expected from the hostage, which in my situation there was, because I'd become so ill. And so that is when President Obama ordered the rescue. And it would take me several years to realize the magnitude of what they do and what they did. But also just like this, I don't know, just this like willingness to take a bullet in so many different ways, and in that moment being the most important thing on the ground it's pretty humbling.
Tell me about being reunited with your husband and your father. What was that experience like, and how did you feel seeing them again?
It was beautiful and lovely, and it was a dream come true, but also it was intense. And after an hour, I was like, okay, I need to go lay down. And so, it just built. Eventually, we got to the point where all of us were able to reunite, my siblings and my father. And that just felt like something I had visualized over and over and over again. It felt like such a manifestation of like freedom, to finally get to be with them, to touch them, to tell them about what I'd been through, to hear their perspective and their side and what they were going through. It was really beautiful.
Can you tell me a bit about, like, from that point to your life now, what your journey's been like?
Wow, it's been a winding road. I mean, recovery from trauma is not straightforward. It's not linear. It's a lot of hard work. I thought that I would go and do a little bit of therapy and move on with my life. I figured I'd go back to my work. I didn't want to go back to Somalia, but I figured I could go back and continue the work that I had done. And I couldn't have been more wrong. A kink in my recovery plan was that I got pregnant with my son very quickly after the rescue. So I got thrown into a whole new life chapter that I did not feel prepared for, but life is life, right? And it's taken me a decade at least to really figure out who I am now in the aftermath, work through a lot of the post-traumatic stress. I've learned so much about grace. I've learned so much about love for myself. My partner, Eric, has been incredibly patient as we've maneuvered through this phase of survival together. I think that a lot of people don't have the support or maybe the tools to manage that part of life. And I feel really grateful and lucky that I have had it to get to this point.
If you could go back and say one thing to 31, 32-year-old Jessica before this happened, like, what would you say to your younger self?
I remember like having this thought like for several weeks into captivity, thinking that like, I'm not this girl. You know, like there were so many other women that I worked with out in the field, and they were hardcore and they were tough. And, you know, I thought they'd be such better hostages than me. Like, I am not that girl. Like, I'm soft skills. I'm the creative person. Like, I'm not tough. I can't do this. And then I remember waking up one morning, I don't know how many weeks in, and I sat up and I looked around and I thought, well, you know, Jess, you're doing it. Maybe you are that girl. And so I think I would say to her, like, you are way tougher than you give yourself credit for, and you're going to get through this and you're going to be just fine.
Amazing. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Actually, the team of Navy SEALs came in at the end and kind of took you from that situation, but you survived it every day. Do you ever like reflect on how much you played a part in your own survival?
Yeah, I think it took me a long time to figure out that there can be more than one hero in a story. And, you know, I spent a lot of time telling the story because they were the heroes, right? And absolutely they are. But it was after a conversation with one of them where they were like, yeah, but you had to like sit out there for all those days and you didn't know we were coming. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, that's true. You're right. And so maybe we can all be heroes.
Can I make one request? Do you mind though if I could be shot in the head and they then discuss this, and the mullah, another mullah, was discussing, and they said, yeah, okay, we'll grant you that. So then it's like, oh my God, so I am being executed.